Hey guys, my name is Rai. Today, I want to talk a little bit about one of the more recent keys I did on my Preservation Evoker, which is a +16 Siege of Boralus. In this key, I am running with a prop paladin I normally run with, a couple friends, and I think this is a really fun key on Prez, although it's kind of gimmicky. Many of you have probably gotten to the last boss before and kind of freaked out, or even maybe not being able to get through the second. So that was one of the requests I've gotten the past couple weeks, was to walk through this key, talk about a little bit what I did, how I approached some of the more difficult healing checks, and ensured that I had healing ready for the more difficult times in the key. As I start the key, this first pack here, as I see a lot of pugs, and even when I was coaching last week, somebody usually dies in this first pull, and it's kind of frustrating for the DPS and your team in general. So I would recommend, as you go into this pull, depending on what your tank decides to do here, usually the standard is pulling an Enforcer, 2 Fire Bombers, and the Wave Shaper. As you're prepping for this pull, I would make sure that you keep a lot of pre-healing out, including pre-tip the scales, Fire Breath, Spirit Bloom, Dream Breath in your stasis, and pressing Zephyr and Obsidian Scales right off the bat. Right away too, I release my stasis as soon as that shatter goes off, and I'm using everything I can to keep my party healed from the Fire Bombers in the first couple globals. This is a fine time to use Rewind, Emerald Communion, and all your big healing buttons, because the most frustrating part of this key can be falling behind, especially in this next pack. If you do choose to lust the second pull instead of the first pull, that's okay, but I would also recommend committing a couple more buttons then to the first pull to make sure that none of your team members die in their opening cooldowns and pot usage. On the second pull of the dungeon, you actually can LOS every single one of the Enforcer and the Raider grips right using this wall. You're going to see here in a minute, I actually make a pretty big mistake and I get caught on one of the barrels and end up dying. But, however, it's a really nice tip to use, especially if you have ranged DPS, to remind them that they can LOS here. Basically, this pull is just about healing your tank and topping up your melee if you have any, as we kind of go into the shots and the Raiders. This again is a fine time to use Rewind if you need. If you're going to stay out for any of the shots, or the pulls, or the Enforcer bellow, you need to make sure you have something popped. See there, for instance, I did have Obsidian Scales, and I could have easily lived that by using something on myself. However, I didn't think I'd actually get caught there, and my AUG does ping to me that I am stuck on the corner, so that was a mistake I made. At the end of the day, not a big deal, was a 15-second time loss in the key, but we're over kind of the more annoying part of the first part of the key. The next 2 packs are also pretty annoying, but I'll show you a couple tricks in which ways you can handle them. In our strategy in this key, we did choose to invis after the second pull to avoid some of the bombers and their really low value count in this dungeon. Going to this next pull, some of you will know as well, there is a Raider in here that pulls you in, there is a bomber that can easily global one of your party members, and I would always recommend having a Zephyr popped on the very first pull-in. This way, it'll reduce the party damage you take, and if somebody gets really unlucky with a bomb, you'll be able to top them pretty quickly. I do immediately put my stasis out, and I use everything right off the rip, including pre-hovering so I can cast while moving, a temporal anomaly, and a dream breath, as you can see loaded in my stasis at the bottom. Again, this is another one of those packs that you just need to make sure that your party members are absolutely top before they get sucked in. The Raider can do a ton of damage, and if they get overlapped with a missed kick, a firebomb, or any of the above, could easily result in them dying. You can see here, I immediately try to heal my AUG up right away before we get pulled in because I see he's getting targeted by firebomb. This is a way that, again, you could lose somebody really easily, so using any healing here, and pre-healing, including, keeping your echoes out and life binding immediately as you get pulled in, is probably going to be your highest chance at making sure your team members live every second. It's very easy to go echo, 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 life bind before every suck, and then immediately, as you can see here, top myself with a life spark proc, or use something like Tip the Scale Spirit Bloom, a charged Spirit Bloom, or even a Dream Breath. On this pack, I am making sure to be spread out from my team in order that the shredders don't jump around and kill a couple of us at once. As a note too, if you are playing Preservation in this key, or Augmentation, you can cauterize the bleed on the tank, and you should really be looking out to do that in these pulls. The bleed from the shredder is very, very deadly, and it's probably the only tank damage your tank receives in some of these pulls. So I am watching and communicating with my AUG to see when I should use cauterize. Mine's on cooldown, his is available, and we're trying to kill this pack before we get another shredder debuff. Another tip too that you can use for your team is making sure that you have a stop available on the shredder ghast to make sure that your tank can avoid getting shredded. Using things like Wing Buffet and Tail Swipe are really, really good, and as you can see, we used a Pressing Roar into an 8-second Hodge to kill off that shredder before the boss. This boss can also cause you problems if you're not careful and you don't respect it. for those that haven't really paid attention to this fight, the actual key mechanic on this boss is not the suck-in, but it's dealing with the powder shots. After you get fixated, the boss has a chance to spawn a powder shot during the encounter, as well as a cleaver. The scary part of this fight is when he does his pull-in, his heavy ordnance in 2 seconds here, you can see I pre-Zephyr, I start ramping, and I have my stasis ready, and now I'm looking out to the powder shot that just spawned. The powder shot's going to send out random bolts of fire to your party members, and on this key level especially too, 2 of them can easily kill somebody. And what is the most deadly is if somebody gets one right before the overlap or the suck-in, that's when they're going to die. So having some healing ready for every single time, as you can see there, that powder shot, I release my stasis right away to make sure everybody's stopped. I can see my mage is going to take a powder shot here in a second, and he's getting fixated. One's on my shaman, and I immediately time dilate him, and then one's back on me. So again, this whole fight is less about actually managing the suck-in, but it's managing this nasty overlap of the suck-in plus the powder shot. You can see my shaman here is getting absolutely blitzed, and I'm a little bit worried about him, and I think he's going to go down. And he does. He actually ends up getting meleeed by the mob, so just as I was about to be able to top him, he does have an unfortunate death. We do recover here pretty quickly, and I do command my team to kind of make sure that we're controlling the powder shots a little bit better. It is almost unhealable if you don't have a stun or some sort of CC capability for the powder shots within the pull in this boss. Just like the raiders, it's really easy to get firebombed. This boss is the exact same mechanic, so if you treat it as such, like watching for firebombs or powder shots in the suck, you'll always be able to come out okay. This is also a time you should be rotating your obsidian scales, your renewing blaze, your emerald communion, and other buttons. You can see in a lot of these times, I actually just use the same combo I use in a lot of my bosses, which is Echo, 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 Verdant Embrace, and then top myself with a Life Spark proc or Spirit Bloom, and you'll see my party gets topped up quickly. This is also a great way to heal on the move, as you can't cast empowered spells when you're in midair. I usually pre-hover before the second, so if I do get caught casting a Temporal Anomaly or Living Flame, I end up being okay. These trash packs kind of suffer the same fate as the pulls before and the boss, is that you have to be very, very careful about overlaps. Right now, the overlap this time is the commander charge into the firebomb or the shredder. So as you can see, we're dealing with the bomber right now, and as well, we're dealing with the shredders teleporting to our team. Like a lot of these keys, you'll see that before I go into any of these packs or my first couple globals in these packs, I have a stasis ready. I'm looking at what buttons I have my Spirit Bloom ready, I have echoes if I need to, and I can release my stasis at any time to top up my team. I do a kind of lazy job at releasing my stasis there, but it doesn't really matter too much as more dangerous stuff is dead. Right now, I'm just looking to do triage healing on the target of the charge, and just making sure that everybody's topped in case a shredder teleports. A handy trick here too is if you're having troubles with the shredders just teleporting a one shot on your team, whether it be on 13, 14, 15, 16, or even beyond, you can offset them by pressing Hodge or another stun like single target stun. Any sort of single target CC can offset them and it'll give you a little bit better of a time. This is another pull where you see I use Emerald Communion right off the bat. There is a powder shot in this pull as well, there is a raider, meaning that at any time my team can get globaled by any one of the casts. When I go into these pulls, I always think of one of two things. I think about Echo, 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 Verdant Embrace, and Spirit Bloom or Life Spark, or I try to use Emerald Communion. The start of these pulls is always the scariest, and as you get to the end, there's virtually no damage, so you can kind of do whatever you want. But I would really recommend respecting these pulls as you get into them right away, and keeping something ready to make sure none of your team members die in the first couple globals. Anytime you fight a powder shot or a raider, remember your rule of thumb is get pre-healing out because you don't know what's going to happen to your team. When fighting this trash in here, after you kind of go through the gauntlet, your only prerogative is making sure that you have a lot of tank healing. There should be virtually no party healing going out unless somebody misses a wave shaper kick, but even if they do, it doesn't really hit for a lot of damage. I would recommend spending as many globals as you can and watching to also cauterize your tank. The Curse Blades do put a pretty nasty bleed on your tank, which is increase the damage they take from the next successive Curse Blade and other mobs, so you can cauterize this once every minute if you're not lucky enough to have a decurse in your group. For me, fortunately, we do have a mage, we do have a shaman, and we do have 2 cauterizes, so our tank is pretty comfy. As we get into the next pack, and I kind of skipped over it, I did want to talk about the captains, how to single target heal, and how to deal with their very nasty charge. But we're going to get there after we finish the Curse Blades. When fighting the Curse Blades again, make sure that your tank has ample healing, and you use things like a Pressing Roar, if you're running Terror of the Skies for your Deep Breath stun, and communicating with your team if you are in Discord to make sure you get stops. Tail Whip, Wing Buffet all work really well, and anything that you can do to help displace these while your tank's trying to kill them quickly is very good. You might see a lot of different routes in Siege of Boralus, and this might not be one of them, and that's okay. If you do get into this next pull, you know you have to deal with a captain, and the next pull after that as well, consecutively a captain. We choose that we're going to actually skip this first captain with a cheeky little rescue skip and get over the ledge here. I call for my Og to hit Verdun to me so you can get over, and we're into the lust pull of the dungeon. We end up not having lust right off the bat, which is okay, but we do get up here pretty quickly. When dealing with these pulls, again, anytime you fight a captain, you should think of one of two things. You have a lot of time to set up before the person that gets targeted by the captain actually expires. So anytime that they do get targeted, you should get an echo on them immediately, go into a Verdant Embrace for single target heal or a one-charge Spirit Plume, then hit them with Echo Reversion. This is going to trigger the Golden Hour effect, and as I've talked about in a lot of my other videos, is going to give you the highest HPS on single target rot. As you can see, Brisky here hit Renewing Blaze and Obsidian Scales, and he was very comfy. I'd recommend, if you're not already tracking your party's defensives, this is a mechanic that is really useful to do so. For instance, right now, my Shaman, I can see him. He doesn't have his wall, but I do know that he has his Bulwark Totem. If not, if he didn't have his Bulwark Totem there or no wall, I would actually end up using Time Dilation there on him. And again, I'm watching my tank, I'm watching my team, and making sure that nobody needs any additional single target healing. My mage there had Ice Cold if needed, and we're off to the more difficult part of this first half of the dungeon. For every Fire Ricochet, you need some sort of healing ramp, and on this key level, if you don't heal it up instantly, your team members will probably die. As you'll see right off the bat, I follow the same practice I usually do in a lot of my keys that offer this kind of healing pattern: Echo, 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 Verdant Embrace, and then Spirit Bloom. As you can see, my team virtually takes no damage. I didn't even go into stasis, I didn't use Rewind, I didn't use Emerald Communion, and we get pretty topped and back pretty healthy pretty quickly. I want to give some advice for this fight, and is that for every Fire Ricochet, you should do one of two things. You should have an Echo ramp, or you should use a big healing cooldown. Another helpful tip here is using Rescue, Obsidian Scales, and Renewing Blaze, alternating on each one of the Fire Ricochets. Some classes are very squishy to this, and you should be watching as whether or not your team has cooldowns. I chose in the first phase not to use Stasis because we'd have Bloodlust running, but you're going to see here how I use Stasis, and Stasis entirely covers 2 Fire Ricochets, but I do have to be very careful with my pattern. Again, I Echo, 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 I pop Obsidian Scales, and again I Stasis, Tip the Scales, Spirit Bloom, Temporal Anomaly, Renewing Breath, or Dream Breath. And you can see my team is virtually topped and made us through the more difficult part of the encounter. And I know here that we deal with the next ramp coming up in a couple seconds. Echo, 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 Echo in this case. And then I Verdant Embrace, I release my Stasis, and it looks like we took absolutely no damage. Again, I'm running very low mastery in this build, and I choose to run low mastery as I do in keys, and I have since Evoker came out. You can do this combo, and even on this key level, you can see where I'm running very high haste and low mastery, and my team is completely fine. We are hoping to skip here the next Fire Ricochet. That's a tip I should probably talk about too. Is any time that a Fire Ricochet is about to come out, you can actually postpone it or prolong it by just pressing one of the displacement abilities you have in your Evoker, which is Tail Whip or Wing Buffet. They can also be displaced by Thunderstorm by Shamans and Typhoon by Druid. Somebody has told me recently that Typhoon no longer works. I'm not sure if that's true, so I apologize if that's inappropriate information, but both the Evoker stops definitely work, and Thunderstorm definitely works as well. So in our composition, we have 5 total ways to displace this Fire Ricochet. As I get into this next phase, I'm starting to think about what I need to do next. I have my Echoes out, a Rescue, and I hit Renewing Blaze, and immediately I'm into that Echo, 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 Verdant Embrace, Spirit Bloom combo. And as you can see, my team's already completely topped and healthy and ready for the next one. Even if my team doesn't have defensives, I do more than enough throughput with low mastery just following this combo on every one of these Fire Ricochets. On this one, I did decide that I was just going to use Emerald Communion for no particular preference other than it looked like my team was low on defensives. We didn't have any Obsidian Scales from our Og, our Mage only had Images, though he wanted to save Ice Cold for next, and our Shaman did Wall, but I decided I was going to be a little safer there with Emerald Communion. Again, no particular preference as to why I chose that, but however, I know I don't need Emerald Communion in the next couple pulls. If it has come up later for mana, or for survivability, it would be fine, but right now, I don't feel like I need it. As we go into this next pack, before you actually enter into combat with this Crusher, you can actually LOS the first stomp there, so I choose to do that in this pull. Immediately I go into this pull, and I do my same combo that I always do, is Stasis, Tip to Scale Spirit Bloom, Temporal Anomaly into Dream Breath. For every one of these Demolisher casts, you're going to notice one thing I do, is I always try to do one of two things. I try to hit Obsidian Scales or Zephyr. If I don't have those things, I also followed an alternating pattern, which I use my Renewed Blaze, use my Rescue Shield, and one important note, which I haven't talked too much about in my keys, but this boss, or this trash, and the next boss, is a very, very good place for your hover DR. If you're playing Chrono Warden, which you probably should be in keys, every time that you press hover for the next couple seconds, I believe it's 3, you get a 20% DR, which is diminishing over the 3 seconds. So if you press it right as the stomp comes out from this crusher, you get a 20% damage reduction for the stomp. This comes pretty close to one-shotting me on this key level, and on this next boss, it actually the mechanic does one-shot me without a DR. So getting used to using hover DR is very, very, very good for being able to prevent yourself from getting one-shot. This is a free get out of jail free for not having to stack verse this season, as just having a flat 20% or 10% wall, even as you need it, is very powerful. As you can see here, every single time one of these stomps comes out, I hit Obsidian Scales, I hit Zephyr, I call for Zephyr and Mass Barrier, or I hit a Rescue Shield. At bare minimum, I'm making sure that I hover to make sure that I have a damage reduction in place for this Demolisher. Especially too if anybody's to miss a kick, or at the same time, I'm just, getting an unlucky crush. This could kill me, so I am taking a little bit of extra precaution. On all these trash bowls, you'll see I've always followed my same healing pattern, is Echo, 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 Burn Embrace, Spirit Bloom, and I go back to damaging the mobs. I'm doing quite a lot of overall this key. I'm at 500k overall by this point of the dungeon, and it's only going to continue to go up, which is kind of cool. I think that this is a pretty good dungeon for just being able to do overall damage, but I think a note too is a lot of damage, and I want to eventually have this conversation with more healers. Healer damage is often just pretty pad. It doesn't matter too much. In these pulls specifically, if I'm not killing the Demolisher, nothing else really matters, right? If we don't have good prio and it's the last to die, we can't really do anything. We can't really go into the next pack, and nothing really matters. So make sure that if you are choosing to do DPS in these pulls, that you're actually hitting the Demolisher and not the little monkeys. Those do act as funnel, and they don't really speed up the dungeon in any meaningful way. What I mean by this is, until the Demolisher dies, we can't pull another Demolisher. If the monkeys die, we can't really do anything anyway, so the only solution is to kill the Demolisher, then we can chain in another Demolisher or monkeys. But we don't want to fight 2 Demolishers at once, as it's too dangerous. So again, healer damage does matter in some extents, but only priority healer damage really does matter. And maybe in a later video I'll talk about that, because I think there's a big misconception about that in keys. I'm watching my tank on these pulls to make sure that it doesn't get bananaed. The healing requirement in these pulls is pretty chill, but something that can happen is my tank can run over banana, get stunned, and easily die if he does not bubble. If you're playing with a not paladin tank, I would be very, very cautious about watching what cooldowns they have available to them and using time dilation on them when needed. These pulls here, we're watching very carefully to make sure that we get some stops for our paladin, that my paladin has enough buttons to get through this pull, and again, I'm just passively keeping heals on him and doing damage. I don't have stasis ready here, and I only really want stasis for the pull from 2 pulls from now, so I'm not too concerned about this pull. We're blasting, I'm watching for kicks, and I'm just hitting Living Flame or Chrono Flame on any of the mobs I can. This is a good example of a pull where my healer DPS, my Fire Breath pad can matter a little bit. There's no prio target in the pull, so it doesn't really matter, and this is what I'd call like neutral prio. We do spend invis bots here to skip this pack. It's pretty deadly on this key level. You don't really want to be fighting snipers. This 2-pack can actually be a little bit deceiving and difficult. If your tank doesn't get the first fixate, I would try to use time dilation or encourage your team to press a defensive button to make sure that they can get through this part of the encounter. The commander plus the Iron Tide Raider can be a little deadly. Anytime it is on me, you're going to see I do one of 2 things. I'm going to press Renewed Blaze or Obsidian Scales. That time I did get sacked on top of pressing Obsidian Scales, so I'm very, very cozy here. However, only the Obsidian Scales last for the run back, or the pull in, sorry. I'm watching my mage with single target healing. He does have a Spirit Bloom hot on him. I am watching him with reversions and echo into Golden Hour, and I'm just doing some passive DPS on this pull. My Og does use Obsidian Scales here. I'm making sure to top him, and I can see now that if my Og gets targeted again, I'm going to want to press something on him. That's his last charge of Obsidian Scales, so coming up, if he does get targeted again, I am going to have to use Time Dilation on him. Luckily it does go on my tank, but again, my tank at this point also calls for TD, so I end up doing it on him. He's absolutely getting blasted by 2 mobs. Respect this pack, and anytime you're fighting a raider and a commander, I'd also really respect keeping a lot of healing ready just in case. I know my next pull is going to be very deadly, as we're going to be doubling this pull with 2 commanders, and I need to save stasis and tip the scales for it. As soon as we get into this pull, you'll see pretty quickly that I send up my stasis just as I normally do to help out with possible oncoming damage. My Og doesn't really have anything for this first slam, and I hit him with a tip the scales Spirit Bloom, and it's already in my stasis. Unlucky here is I actually panicked on the Og and actually didn't put it in my stasis this time. So my stasis got put behind and I pressed it late, and I ended up using Temporal Anomaly as my first gulp instead, which kind of sucks that I lost a lot of single target healing. However, it doesn't matter too much as this pack's getting deleted, and I'm just really worried now about keeping people up single target. I do have Emerald Communion available to me, and I do have Rewind if I need it, so anytime one of these things are coming out, I'm making sure to press something to keep them alive. I would say if your team does decide to do this pull, it's completely acceptable to use all your healing cooldowns in this pull as well. I would try to avoid using and overusing your Obsidian Scales or any of your buttons such as Zephyr and Time Dilation or your raid CDs, because this boss can be pretty deadly. But again, on this trash, feel free to use things like Emerald Communion, Rewind, Time Dilation if needed, and make sure you keep yourself alive. Usually if I get charged by a Captain's Charge, even on this key level, I can survive with just Renewing Blaze. My tank did go into this boss pretty quickly and I wasn't really happy about it, but I want to show you guys that just on this fight, every single time that one of these stomps come out, we end up using some sort of either personal or raid external. On the first one, we do commit Zephyr, and on the next one, we are probably going to commit Zephyr again for my Augmentation Evoker. But you'll see every single time one of these waves comes out, breakwaters, I also end up using a charge of Hover to make sure that I get a little bit of extra damage reduction before the event. Your HPS does not matter in this dungeon. On this fight at least, the next fight's going to be very difficult. However, I'd be very careful about, what buttons you press and keeping your tank alive. You can be very slow to top your party, but your tank's going to be taking a lot of damage. Don't worry too much about spending or overspending your healing cooldowns here, because as long as you have them going into the last fight, you're going to be okay. I'm doing damage here when I can, and again, I'm hovering where I can, and I press something like my Renewing Blaze, my Obsidian Scales, or I call for Mass Barrier. On this key level, like I said, you're going to need something for every single one of these slams, and if you don't, and as you'll see here in a little bit, we end up losing a party member to one of these slams, and it kind of sucks. This composition is really nice, having Blessing of Sacrifice, having 2 Zephyrs, and having, especially on Preservation Evoker, your free wall with the 20% DR. As you'll see here, I end up using Obsidian Scales, and this keeps me alive fine, and I release my stasis to top up my party. For this breakwater, I do end up using a rescue, and we're back into regular cadence. Again, same tip is just try to use your hovers as liberally as you can on this fight, because 20% DR is free, and just alternate using Obsidian Scales, Zephyrs, and Rescues, and I think you're going to be more than okay on this encounter. Looks like here we use Zephyr, and you can see here how low my Augmentation Evoker drops, and that's also with me using my hover wall. And you can see here is an example, my shaman didn't communicate to our team that he needed something and he full out got one shot. We did have Zephyr available on that one, we could have pressed from our AUG, but I think we had a miscommunication, and unfortunately our shaman did lose some of his Spy Master stacks. I did have time dilation available, and, you know, with a little bit better communication, he could have lived there, but again, just as a rule of thumb, don't disrespect this boss. Use your hover charges, use your obsidian scales, and use your rescue as needed. One thing I'd recommend too is on this very last breakwater before the next fight, trying to save something for the next encounter. As you can see there, I actually lived with just my hover charge, but it was barely. I kind of played Russian roulette on that one. But I did really want to make sure I had a charge of obsidian scales on the bowl for this next boss. This next boss has probably caused a lot of you some hardship, especially when it comes to healing. Remember, this boss is just about teamwork and cooperation, as it is from your team's defensives, as is your healing output. But you do need to follow a certain plan to make sure that you can help your team achieve success in this encounter. You're going to see that before every slam comes out, I'm prepped with two things. I'm prepped with echoes out on people, and I'm casting a spirit bloom as the dots go out. As you can see, this Call of the Deep's about to come out here. I hit Zephyr and immediately hit my first dispel. And I always use time dilation on the first person who I don't dispel. Either way, no matter what happens, Zephyr and time dilation on the very first slam and debuffs that come out in this fight. That's because this is where you're kind of most, this is where your team's usually the weakest. The overlap comes right away, and you don't want to lose anybody in the global. As you can see there, right before the next debuffs come out, I immediately just go and I start casting a Spirit Bloom. I release my stasis, and I'm topping my party as quick as possible. Your whole goal here is keeping your party topped immediately after those debuffs come out. So as you can see, I'm watching the timer for Putrid Waters, and what am I doing? I'm getting echoes out on my team, and I start casting Spirit Bloom right away. So as soon as that first tick goes off, you can see my Shaman and myself get topped up almost instantly. My Shaman does Dwarf, and I decide to dispel myself. You'll see that on every part of this fight, I follow the exact same cadence here. I get echoes out, start cast a Spirit Bloom before the debuffs hit, and as soon as they land, I immediately have a little bit of healing to top them right away. As you can see, my Shaman gets healed up right away there, and the other one's my tank. The reason why I do this is it buys me time to decide what I need to do in the next split second before I decide who to dispel. Sometimes the debuffs come staggered, one might go in my tank and one might go in somebody that has Dwarf, so I usually need that second or so to decide as to whether or not or who I'm going to be dispelling. This was a little bit of a tricky one here. I end up falling in the water, I dispel Dump, but I do kind of fall behind for a second. So, not exactly the best case scenario, but I did end up Emerald Community. This was a mistake on my part. I didn't want to use it here, but it's okay as I get through the rest of the fight just fine. I send out my echoes, and what do I start doing here is I start casting my Spirit Bloom as it hits me right away. I dispel myself, and the person that I don't dispel usually gets time dilation, but he was out of range. This resulted in him cheating on this part of the encounter, which kind of sucked, but it was more just improper planning between the two of us of location. Again, I set out echoes here, and I end up using my life bind, tip the scale Spirit Bloom, and set up my stasis. I dispel my augmentation Evoker immediately, and now I have stasis to release on this next slam. Again, the most important part of this encounter is keeping everybody top before these slams. You can do it a lot of different ways, and there are a lot of different methods you could do as a preservation Evoker to do it, but this is the method I found works best for me. As you can see, right here was a good example of where the debuffs came staggered. My tank got the first one, but my Shaman got the next debuff over a second later, which didn't give me a lot of time to react. Because I was a little bit panicked, I did manage to get a heal off on him and did get him dispelled, but I was also about to dispel my tank. I start setting up echoes here, I'm watching the debuffs, and I cancel my Spirit Bloom because they're not out yet. I finish my cast, I dispel myself, and now I'm watching my Aug, who now has to sit with the debuff. You're going to see in this video that I follow still the same single target healing approach I would in other videos, which is that Echo, Reversion, keeping up Golden Hour on my party members, and making sure that I heal people single target using my Life Spark box and my Spirit Bloom. As I get to this next platform, I know I need to commit everything to help my team live here. I do have Rewind, I have Emerald Communion in a minute, and I do have Stasis coming up soon. However, on every one of these stomps, I want to make sure I have something for my party to keep them topped. My Og there didn't use his Obsidian Scales. He was at 95%. I believe I did call for it, but he died almost instantly, which is really unfortunate. I did use Rewind just on that stomp to help us get caught back up. And I'm pre-casting my Spirit Bloom to make sure that I get a little bit of healing out. However, we did make a little bit of a mistake here, and we didn't get topped the way I wanted to. I don't have a lot of healing for this next debuff set. However, we did get pretty lucky that it was on our Shaman. I dispelled our Og instantly as he hit Obsidian Scales. I rescued my Shaman for the next stomp. And I'm making sure I top my party for the next set of debuffs. I do send out some echoes here, and I'm getting ready to dispel, and we want to beat that next lamp. Now, all that's left in this fight, because I managed to do the rest of the fight fine, is that I just have to heal off the debuffs that spawn on our team. I do have Emerald Communion coming up. We didn't even get to lust this boss, and we are able to kill this in a pretty reasonable time. I would say that for this last platform, you probably want a lot of buttons available to you, including Emerald Communion and Rewind if you can, and just using them, not thinking about it, and as soon as you're in a state of panic, using them to top up your team. As you can see here, you can see me pre-casting Spirit Bloom again, so that I have time to make a decision, instantly healing myself and our mage on this encounter, and then dispelling myself, time dilating the mage, and continuing to blast. I do rescue for fun, and now all we have to do is send out some rescues here and finish the encounter. I like this key a lot. It's kind of grown on me. I think the RNG at the start of the dungeon could be really frustrating, but especially as I've tanked DPS and healed this key now at a 16 level, I think that's I do like healing it the best. I would really recommend to not ever disrespect mobs in this dungeon. Use all the buttons that you can to make sure, especially on the start of trash packs, with bombers, with powder shots, and with those raiders to keep your team topped. Use things like Obsidian Scales more frequently if you haven't been already, and use as much healing output as you possibly can to make sure that your team doesn't die in their offensive cooldowns. Especially in this last encounter, like at the very start of the encounter, making sure that nobody dies in their big cooldowns on the go is going to help you obtain victory in this key. On this last boss, losing people and having deaths is going to slow you down a lot, create a higher healing requirement, and make it a lot harder for your team to be able to live as their defensive usage might get messed up. Respect every one of the stomps, respect every one of the debuffs, and have a plan. Start pre-healing, set up your stasis early, and don't be afraid to use things like Emerald Communion and Rewind if you do make a mistake. Remember, anytime you don't use Dispel, you can use Time Dilation. Again, thanks guys for watching this video. Hope you have a happy holidays, and I'll catch you guys in the new year.